Hi everyone, I'm Joe Koppel. In this presentation, I'll be examining the historical context of the word patriarchy for the Multimedia Keyword Project for Topics in Rhetoric. There has been public discourse about the origins of the word patriarchy for decades, with conversations continuing into contemporary discussions as scholars and researchers attempt to narrow down when this construct of patriarchy began and borrow questions from scholars like Cheryl Glenn, such as who has a voice, whose histories are archived, and who is in control of the narrative. Haley Cohen of the University Wire published an article in the Carnegie Mellon University newspaper, The Tartan, exploring how patriarchy was first established, saying, in Mesopotamia, about 5,000 years ago, elites needed a large state population to produce resources and defend the state. Women were pushed into childbearing, especially bearing sons who would become soldiers, and men were expected to fight in wars. Though many scholars argue that patriarchy is rooted due to an uptick in agriculture, Miss Cohen believes that patriarchy is a social construct born out of institution-like governments and state regulations. To begin this investigation through a feminist rhetorical lens, it is important to understand how feminist scholars define patriarchy. Bell Hooks describes patriarchy in her book, The Will to Change: Men, Masculinity, and Love, saying patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females. Hooks supports the idea that patriarchy is born from socially constructed gender expectations and is framed around oppressing those deemed weaker. Hooks describes patriarchy through her own personal stories and accounts growing up in a patriarchal household that reinforced gender roles. Pulling from her memory, Hooks gives examples of how her father instilled feminine gender values in her, while her brother was taught to be strong, stern, and powerful. She discusses the inherently oppressive, violent nature that is taught through a patriarchal lens. Looking at the term through more contemporary researchers, Lindsay Benstead, in her 2020 article, Conceptualizing and Measuring Patriarchy, The Importance of Feminist Theory, explores how the definition and history of patriarchy is ever-changing and needs to be constantly evaluated as a multidimensional term in both public and private spheres. In today's America, patriarchy has been weaponized as a tool to oppress men and women through politics, industry, and social agendas that are pushed in a growing digital space. Catherine Martin shares this sentiment and reveals the oppression women have faced in the media and archival history in her book Archival Research as a Feminist Practice, driving home the importance of understanding the relationship between the influence of patriarchy over archival history and female voices. She highlights how it is not the fact that women do not have a history in media, but rather that there is a lack of women who are named and accredited in the archives. Calling attention to feminist archival researchers, Martin discusses how feminist voices are not only being regarded now, but work back into the histories. In looking at the evolution of patriarchy, Lorene Jimenez Maceño Uema explores the history of the word patriarchy and how it has evolved and shifted forms to meet cultural and societal needs. She explores the idea that patriarchy is a social construct meant to devalue women and place men at the top of a hierarchical ladder. She looks at how patriarchal oppression is institutionalized and reaches far past individualistic views on gender roles and patriarchy. This institutionalized patriarchal thinking overflows into culture and everyday society, creating double standards between men and women. Ms. Maceño Uema argues that institutions and cultural promoting patriarchal values, patriarchy, and the oppression of marginalized people has been revitalized in a contemporary setting. This begs the question, what does patriarchy look like in a modern digitized world? Feminist author Judith Brodsky explores the fight against patriarchy in a digital environment in her 2021 book, Dismantling the Patriarchy Bit by Bit: Art, Feminism, and Digital Technology. Brodsky discusses the history of the word text and how literature is historically seen as inherently feminine. In her chapter on disrupting patriarchy through digital language, she shows how patriarchal systems have corrupted this knowledge and turned it masculine. She continues by advocating for the perseverance and creativity feminist activists, rhetors, and artists have endured to reclaim their voice through digital media. There is a section of the chapter that discusses hypertext and digs deeper into how the concept of hypertext relating them to weaving and stitching words together. Brodsky cites Shelley Jackson, who describes hypertext literature as disrupting the epistemological structure of the patriarchy by its avoidance of linear expository prose. I like Brodsky's metaphor on hypertext as it illustrates how literature has an inherently feminine characteristics and allows us to leave on a positive note. In an ever-growing digital world, now more than ever, women have an opportunity to reclaim their voice through digital media and push back against the grasp of the patriarchal powers that seek to silence them. Thank you.